All right, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody has got their coffee so you're not too sluggish after lunch. We've had a wonderful morning and we're about to start the third panel. And the third panel is called, How Can Hawaii Build Infrastructure Faster and Cheaper? So in the previous discussion, previous panel, we were talking about housing, right? We all love housing, but you really can't understand housing without infrastructure. Infrastructure is going to determine parking requirements, who's driving, how people are going to get around. And one of the most important things for human society is mobility, right? It gives us freedom. And so to be able to deliver that is one of the, one, we want to do it environmentally sustainably. Two, it has to reflect the needs. It's tough because you have to forecast the needs going forward like 40 years, right? Because the idea is, especially big things, are going to last for a long time. And you want to make sure it's equitable in serving all of our communities. And it's a really tough job, but it's a very important job, right? And so one of the things, we're going to be talking about the rail. Guys, I know the rail is a little touchy sometimes, but this is going to be a story about like where we were and where we are now and how we got there, right? And I also want us to think about this. Sometimes we make this all about Hawaii, but this is a struggle that every single jurisdiction has faced with around the country, right? So I was talking about the bullet train to nowhere in California. I've talked about the $3 billion, or it's probably $10 billion for 3-mile subway line in New York, right? It's just very difficult to provide infrastructure and allow community input. And so we're going to talk about those dynamics and finding and looking at the incentives that are placed on people going forward. So we have a fantastic panel going forward, and I'm going to save the bios. If you're interested in the bios, you can read them. But we'll just talk about Lori Kahikina, sorry. I'm sorry, here's the thing. I made up I always get nervous up here, so it's very hard for me to like talk about things. And who's the CEO of HEART, right? And she has done a great job of delivering a functioning rail, right? And we're going to hear about that. We're going to hear from Lance Wilhelm. So he is the president of the Wilhelm Group, and he was one of the first contractors for HEART. So we're going to learn about that. So he provides a little bit of private sector. And then we have Ed Sniffen, who is the director of Hawaii Department of Transportation, and just playing a really important role of the state. So we got three organizations, three perspectives. We got the private sector with Lance. With Lori, we got kind of this parastatal administration, and then we got the government itself. So we're going to have a really good time. So I'm going to sit down and we're going to do something, and I got a couple surprises cooked up, so we'll see what's going on. Okay, so let's begin with you, Lance, because as far as I understand, you are at the very beginning of this project, right? So can you just paint us a picture of, one is the relationships between your group and the government and HEART and how they all relate with one another and where you came in, just so we have an understanding of what is it we're even talking about, these relationships.
Sure. Thanks. Aloha, everyone. Thanks for letting me come. It's a huge mistake to let me go first. That's kind of just, it was an error of epic proportion. Before I start, I'm going to answer your question, I promise. But I have to give a quick shout out because I'm not sure this has ever happened, but you have like 3 commitment alumni on the stage at the same time.
Woo!
We're going to, midway through, we're going to sing Imua for you. I suspect this may be the last time you get three Kamehameha alum, alumni here at the same time. So at the time we started Rail, I was senior vice president of Kiewit, and so we were one of several bidders on the first segment, which was about $500 or $600 million, which was supposed to take the guideway from its extreme west side towards town. And so we were fortunate enough to win that contract. Before we started that contract, they let another project out to do the section that ties into that all the way to the end of Pro City. So we were lucky enough to win that. And then they had another contract to build that maintenance and storage facility that sits sort of midway through that. And then we won that too. Probably an error in my judgment, but we did that. Kidding. So we had about $1.1 billion under contract, and we were the first real construction firm involved in physical construction on the job. There was still, they had been designing and working on the EIS and all of the entitlement work for years in advance of that, many years in advance of that. And we were just the first physical construction to take place. And the nature of the relationship, keep in mind, this was before there was a HEART. So there was us, and our contract was technically with the City and County of Honolulu, Department of Transportation Service, I suspect, but it was not, because they hadn't formed HEART at that point. And so it wasn't until midway through our contract that we actually had our contract assigned from the city to HEART.
Perfect. What year did they create Heart? Lori, you probably know this.
Lori question.
Oh, no, I've only been at Heart 2 years. I don't.
Was more than 2 years.
2011, I think it was 2011. What the?
2011. And
What is it?
did they create Heart as a response to certain dynamics between your contract and the City and County of Honolulu, or was that always the intention to create Heart along the way?
I think, I think it was always the intention.
Yeah, I think, there was an interest, I think, from the city administration that things needed to get started, and they really wanted to get started. And so they still hadn't essentially built the internal governance infrastructure to deal with the project. And so they just tucked it in the city to start, always sort of with the intention that HEART would eventually be created, or an authority of some kind would be created to manage the system. And but we beat that to the finish line. So we started beforehand, and then we eventually became part of that structure.
Okay, so one of the things I find this is really interesting. So I'll bring it. I talked a little bit about this idea of, this morning, of pouring great ideas into the machine and then having it go through multiple agencies and having different processes. And it's very difficult to know who's in charge and do what. And so this is just a great example of, like, you already have, we haven't even talked about subcontractors or anything, but we already have 3 agencies with 3 slightly different agendas, probably with different people sitting on their boards and people calling you all the time. So this is a complicated project, right? And this is the reality of your lives all the time. Okay. So Lance, can you give me a couple, like, how does a bid start? And what are you in charge of? Are you in charge, do you have to take on all the risks? What happens if something goes wrong? Can you just give us, like, if there's a good anecdote about a setback or something that really triggered all these kind of complicated issues that you have to face as a contractor?
One of the things that we used to talk about at Kiewit, all contractors face this, right? We basically get to price our product one time, right? So we're not like a retailer that if you sell Aloha shirts and it's a big seller, you can raise the price later. Or as supplies dwindle, you can raise the price. Or if you got too many supplies, you can lower the price. So we sell a product that we get to price one time. We get to price it on the day we bid the job, and we have to live with that for the entire project. So now imagine for a minute that you have to price your product, and it's gonna have to last for the next 7 or 8 years. And you have to predict all of the implications of what's going to happen in that 7-year time frame. Will there be supply shortages? Will there be labor increases? Will there be political unrest? Like all of the different things that could happen, you have to think about all of that, plus just what it costs to build the thing and how many people it's going to take and how many pounds of rebar and how many cubic yards of concrete. You do all of that and you sit there and you kind of work on that for months and months and months. And then on a Thursday around 2 p.m., you turn your number in and you hope you're the guy they pick. And you kind of hope you got it right because that's the only chance you really have. So that's what's a little bit different about our business versus something else.
And so I've never lived anything in life where everything goes according to plan, and I couldn't imagine with a transportation project. So let's say you've bid all this up, you've put everything into your model, right? Like you're just gritting your teeth that everything's going well, and then what happens when something goes wrong? Which it's a project, right?
That's
$100
that's
million.
an Ed question.
Thank you for not saying Lori.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that contracts, right, contracts are built to contemplate things that might happen. So
Yeah.
they're very long and complicated documents. They're not like they try their best in the documentation to anticipate every possible implication of what might occur, and they put mechanisms in place to address that. So it's all essentially intended to be spelled out in the documents themselves so that if and when something were to happen, you can look at the contract and all parties, whether it's contractor, the government, subcontractors, organized labor, whoever needs to understand how this is supposed to work can see it all kind of in the bright light of day, and it sits on the paper there, and then you go there and you try to do the best you can. The reality is, I think Ed and Laura would probably agree, the words on the paper are limited to what words on the paper tend to be limited to. And so the reality always sits somewhere between the words, right? There's some interpretation of what it means, and there's some, I think it means this. Well, another very rational reading of the same thing could mean something entirely different. And so what you really need to make complex projects work comes down to people. You need like real humans that can look at each other in the eye and try to understand what each other are saying and find a path forward. So you gotta have good people, is what it comes down to.
Great. Well, since we're talking about good people, let's move on to Lori.
Thank God, thank God.
Lori, you have a interesting background. So can you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you became CEO of HEART?
Sure. Yeah, I actually have no transit background. I came from Department of Environmental Services under Mayor Caldwell, and ENV is in charge of the sewers and the trash. And actually, my relationship with HEART was very rocky. I was on the opposite side, protecting the sewers, because HEART was asking for variances, and what a variance is each entity has their own design standards. So for example, I have a 36-inch sewer line. I need 3 feet clearance from the edge of my pipe to the next utility. Ernie we were hip and hip, the two of us fighting HEART. He has a 48-inch water line and he needs 5-foot clearance. So HEART is coming in and saying, Lori and BWS, we need variances. We don't want to adhere to your standards, and go ahead and grant it. Like, no. How are my men gonna maintain their sewer lines? How am I gonna protect my sewer lines if you're already trying to do a variance on your design? So they wanted 1.5-foot clearance to my sewer line. When you dig up the trench, the lines are never where they say they are, especially older ones. Our infrastructure is about 100 years old. And so you have to design to standards, expecting you're gonna encounter things in the field that you know unforeseen. So that was my experience with HEART on the opposite side. It was very public. Ernie and I fighting HEART. And then I get asked to come into HEART to lead the organization. And there was a lot of pushback from FTA, from a lot of different stakeholders, like, you have no transit experience. I said, I don't need the transit experience. They're already in HEART. The experts are there, the consultants are there, they have reach back. My job is to lead the organization, be a manager, and help get things unstuck, help wherever I can. And the main difference that I had from my predecessors, I'm local, born and raised here, so I have a little bit more stake in the game. I live here, so all my family and friends are here. So if I do anything not ethical, oh, I'm gonna get cracks, right? So I have a little bit more, like I said, stake in the game, but also I had prior relationships coming into the organization. So when I came in, Hart did not have every relationship every stakeholder they touched, it wasn't a very good relationship. Whether it was city administration, the city departments, state departments, HECO, FTA, and of course the public. So I had that coming in, and so it's much easier to call, for example, Ed. Poor guy gets calls from me all the time. Can you please help me, Ed? I need help with this. And so it's a little bit easier, and we're very humble. The problem I had at ENV dealing with Hart, there was no humbleness. It's ENV, get out of my way, because I have a P3 coming in. You need to just get out of my way. I was like, that's not how you do things locally or anywhere. You need to work with individuals. So I'm sorry, that was a long answer. I have no transit experience. Sorry. But I have utility relocation and construction experience in Hawaii, which is exactly what we're doing in Hart.
No, so that's a great, I think that's a great example, right? So I don't know anything about infrastructure, right? So one of my first questions about reading your appointment is like, oh, you don't have very much infrastructure experience. And so to the outside world, that seems like not what is needed. But now that I hear your thing, what's needed is relationships order in creating trust.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's a totally different experience in what is needed, right? So what new experience or perspectives have you acquired as CEO of Hart that you didn't have before coming in? What have you learned on the job?
Okay.
Or maybe you knew everything.
The list is long. I only have 5 minutes. So I think the main thing is when I was at ENV, in my previous, that position was very public. So we would get interviewed all the times, or if we had a sewer main break, get interviewed constantly. What was shocking to me coming into this position is, and actually I think the main reason Hart was formed is to keep politics out of it. There's no such thing as that. Coming into this position, it's very political, meaning my first few months, I did do a lot of, not a lot, but I had some missteps. Coming from ENV, my attitude was pretty much, look, I have a federal mandate over my head. I have a consent decree. I'm gonna do what I need to do, get out of my way. You can't do that here at Hart. At Hart, we need everyone's help. We're not self-sufficient like my old department was, and you need the politicians. I need the state legislator. I need the city council. And in one of my very first meetings in city council, I offended a council member because I felt she was insulting me. And so we got into it, and it's so public. And I forgot, because it was COVID. You just forget that the media is there because the cameras aren't there. They're watching it on Zoom. And then the two of us got into it, and front page news. And then for the rest of her term, the two of us are battling. So it was a mean lesson for me to learn that, you can agree to disagree and just leave it at that. Don't fight it out, because you're gonna lose in the end. So it was my lesson learned is this project is so much more public than anything that I ever encountered in my career, and it is very political. And I don't mean politics in the normal sense. It's just people get offended easily, so you need to be careful how you step. And that argument really was, I couldn't be as forthright as I normally wanted to be because I had to talk to my board first. But the city council meeting came up first before my board meeting, and so I was trying to respect my board, trying to respect the city council, and trying to respect the public. And to me, it was a misstep. Yeah, it was a mistake on my part. So just not realizing how charged this project is from a political stance.
Yeah, I mean, could never imagine. I mean, I don't think human beings like to be under the spotlight with everybody yelling at them for every single moment. And we really thank you for stepping up and sitting in the spotlight, which I'm sure you didn't want to, right? Can you give me just an example of a day in the life of you as CEO? And like, can you give an example of something that happened along a line or a street, something where you had to step in, call? What's it like when you, I don't know, if, there's a million of them, so you pick.
There is. So maybe, was it last year? I think it was last year, maybe earlier this year. I happened to be out in the field and I was walking with my staff because I wanted to make sure that, you know, the contractors are on time. And there was a steel plate in the middle of the intersection of, I want to say it was Cook Street and Halekoila. And the contractor came up to me and they said, we do potholing, and potholing is to just put a drill down just to see what utilities are there. And they said, our drill rig, it just went straight through, meaning they felt no resistance. I was like, that means there's a big cavern there. Open that plate and I want to see it. And so we're in the middle of this intersection and these huge trucks are driving past us, and there was about 3 inches of asphalt just shaking as these trucks came by. I was like, there's a huge puka in the middle of this intersection. I said, we need to shut this thing down now. First entity I called was Department of Facility Maintenance. They own the city streets. So I called my friend Tyler and I said, hey Tyler, I said, I need you to check who owns this intersection. I'm busy. Open your damn computer and look who owns it. I'm not kidding, Tyler. There's a huge puka here. I need to know, is the state owned it or the city owned it? Hopefully it's the state. So on this side of the intersection, it's us. I'm like, oh, okay. So the next call was Department of Transportation Services. Called the director. He didn't answer. I called the deputy and I said, I need you to get your crews out here and shut down this intersection right now. And it's like, well, okay, you need to fill out an application. No, you don't understand. Get your crews out here right now and shut it down. And then I called Board of Water Supply, ENV, DDC, Board of Water Supply and ENV. You need to test your sewer line and water line, because for this cavern to come about, it didn't happen overnight. There's something leaking to eat away and erode at the material there. So I'm telling you, within 15 minutes, all these different crews came out, ENV, Board of Water Supply, DTS shut down, and Department of Design and Construction came out. And actually what it was a storm drain that was been leaking for years. So they shut down that intersection they actually did pretty quick for government, 6 months. 6 months, they refurbished that storm drain, and then their second phase of the project, they gotta go upstream because it's continuing to leak. So that's what I'm talking about with relationships. I could easily pick up a phone and call whoever I need to mobilize quickly to get things done. So that was so incredible of the city departments coming to help us.
Yeah, it's an example of like all of government helping out, but it's also an example of a person taking leadership and being able to just leverage all these different agencies and recognizing the different power struggle, different things. And I will say this is like, these are amazing leaders, but think of all the challenges that happen on the 2 or 3 levels down. And I will say this, I am not a director, so I always have to get approval from my director, and I never do anything. But I have way less discretion and I don't, than directors, and directors are supposed to have discretion, right? And you guys get to say, you know what, I'll take the rap for it, do it. But I, as a public servant, it's hard to fire me, but the way you fire me is if I don't follow procedure. Right? And so you can see that these people have a very different level of incentive. Yet, what's the size of your staff, Lori?
The size of what?
Your staff?
Well, we have about 40 city staff, but on the whole, our whole team with consultants, it's about 150.
150. And how many staff do you have, Ed?
We have about 2,500.
Okay, so we're talking thousands of people with incentives that are different than yours. And and they don't want to get in trouble. And you know what? They're going to be around longer than you are, right? So this is just an incredibly tough problem, and we're lucky that you have relationships. And so part of leading is to recognize the kind of like the way people act all the way down, because mid-level managers do not act like directors. In my experience in government, and if you do, you're not going to be a mid-level manager for very long. So why don't we move on to Ed just for a second? So can you give us a little bit about your background? Because I think it's especially your work at how you move from highways to the directorship right now.
So I'm Ed. Thanks for having me tonight. Today was in engineering. I'm an engineer, civil engineer by training. I went to school for that, and in 13 years in the industry. Was a geotech here in Hawaii first for the first 5 years, and said I was born here. I'm gonna work here and die here. And my wife asked me to move, so I did. So we spent 5 years in Oregon, but worked for a global firm. So I got to travel and work in 26 out of the states, Australia, Canada, quite a bit, and Japan. So it was a good experience. But when we were pregnant with our first son, it was very difficult for me to say I would be around to help her raise him. So we came back home, where we have family, we have support. Coming back home, I went back to the engineering firm that I started with, and the world just felt a little small. So jumped into the state at that point. There was a good friend that was the director of transportation at the time. Went into the state and worked for the DOT and just loved it there. From my perspective, and this is for anybody in the room who's looking for a job change, okay? From my perspective, if there's any place that I would recommend anybody go if you want any kind of impact for your communities, it's the DOT. Because everything you touch, you touch anything in the DOT, it affects somebody's lives, good or bad, right? And that's kind of a motivating factor for me and for a lot of the people who work there. So I was in the DOT, loved it there, got to 2011 and just didn't see eye to eye with some of the appointees at the time. So I left, and when Governor Ige came back, was elected, I came back into highways. I was there for 8 years, and Governor Green asked me to step into the director role here.
Perfect. So what did you learn as in charge of highways, and how has your perspective had to shift as now the director of transportation?
Well, I think one of the biggest things, and Lance and Lori had talked about it, relationships are huge. I see a bunch of people in this room that I had to learn a lot from, that I had to partner with, just to make sure things would work. One of the things that I think everybody in this room can agree to is the state processes suck. Just bottom line, right? So if you're gonna try to get something done from a procurement perspective, there's policies and procedures that are put in place to make sure that a 7-year-old can't mess it up. And that means that you stack up these policies and procedures, so everybody got to go line by line. If you're looking at making sure there's not a mistake, that's a good way to do it. If you're making sure that your agency is as nimble as possible, that's absolutely the wrong way to do it. But that's how the states are set up, because we don't want to make a mistake. So in order to get things done a lot quicker, I had to partner with a lot of people in this room to make sure that we can push it forward. Private sector is a lot more nimble. We can work things out with the private sector a lot easier. Working with Lance, before Lance, we started working with Lance, Kiewit, they would walk on site, trip over a rock, and change order right away. But Lance changed that in the relationships that we had to ensure that we could work things out in the field. They're not always going to be right on their bids. We're not always going to be right on our plans. There's going to be relationships that we're going to have to make so we can horse trade on the project for the best interest of the state, best interest of the contractor, everybody working for it to make sure we got stuff done. That's what I learned in that role. It wasn't a cookie cutter process to get through if you really want to get things done. If you want to just stick around for 8 years, that's fine. But if not, if we're really looking for impact, there's different ways to do things and different people who got to work with. So that's the perspective I had at highways. At the director position, I have to be a little more hands-off. I have really good leaders in all of the modes, in airports, highways, and harbors, and in our administration side. I want to get involved in everything, but I shouldn't, because I would be undercutting my leadership in different areas. So I had to pull back and make sure I look high level, let everybody know where we're going, what we prioritize, what's important to us, and let them give us the direction on how we get there. Now, of course, I'm going to feed in my perspective. If we're not moving fast enough, I'm going to let them know. If we're missing something, I will let them know. And if we're looking at other opportunities that are not being identified, I'll let them know. But after that, that's them. They move forward. But the thing I make sure that with them is when they move forward, that's my idea. So if there's any criticism that comes from the public or legislators or anybody else, that's me. I'll take it because we talked about it. I set the vision. We're moving forward.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing correctly is a big part of your job is empowerment, right? So you got all these people who you have this law that some, legislature, probably with well-meaning, there was a mistake, so they said, no, we need to have a laundry list of things. If you follow all these lists, you don't get very much done. So what you're trying to do is say, hey, I trust you, I'll cover for you. My vision is we need to deliver roads to the people, and that's what people want. They don't want us to follow the road.
Roads and harbors and airports.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Are we all going to do commercials? I mean, I'm just curious.
So anyway, we're taking, okay. But the big thing, I think, we're always going to follow the law. But it's not even the laws that hamper us. It's usually the policies that the department's put in place to protect itself. So getting through those policies and procedures to ensure that we streamline things, we show people we trust them, we let them know that we're going to move forward as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And if we see things that break down, we'll fix it. Those are the processes that we're trying to set.
That's really interesting. Lori, can you, in any given week, what percentage of your time is spent, and particularly at the beginning of your term when things were a little rockier, what percentage of your time was spent responding to outside asks and outside requests from the higher ups, different people, versus managing the project?
Oh, especially when I got in, it was probably 90%. But we had a lot of work to do. Our reputation was terrible. So I would spend so much of my time doing, like this, public speaking. When this is a big group though, but I would go out, talk to Rotary clubs. Maybe there's 10 people there, neighborhood board, maybe there's 5 people there, business association, anyone who would have me. So like last year, I think I did over 88 speaking engagements, and it was I just needed to get the word out that we're a different heart, give us a chance, we're trying to do things better. But the media, it was constant. It was, and it's so negative, and you can't not respond because there'll be, well, Hart chose not to respond, and it'll just turn into a negative story. But after a while, I got to see what different reporter style was, and after a while, I'm like, you know what? If you're just gonna twist my words and be so negative, I'm not even gonna talk to you. It's like, you know what? I'm really trying to run a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project here. I have better things to do than to talk to you just so that you could twist my story. So most of the media I talk to, there's only a couple I don't, but I would say most of my job coming in was dealing with stakeholders, dealing with outside pressures, but now it's a little bit different. It's much more less negativity, especially from the media, so I can spend more time dealing with the project. I'm like Ed, I love construction, especially now we're doing the utility relocations. That's my bread and butter. I just love that, but I have to be hands off. I don't want to micromanage my staff, but they know it's fun for me. So it's like, at first I would go to the weekly contractor meetings. We have 2 contractors out there, and every week I'd be in there and interject, like, oh, what about this? Oh, what about this? And then I was just stepping on the toes of my managers. So now it's, Lori, can you just log in from the Zoom meeting and silence yourself? Don't turn your camera on. It's like, okay, just be quiet. But then I do take notes that, hey, if they're stuck on something, that's my job. That's my job. If I need to call Ed or HECO or UH, these guys are stuck. They've tried as best as they can at the staff level. Now it's my job to try and push things forward at my level. But
the fact that you are so fascinated by utility rearrangement, is it rearrangement or management?
Relocation.
Relocation, that is, like, I'm glad we have people in the government that are like that. Because that's probably not a normal hobby for people.
It's not, and I actually broke my leg earlier this year skiing in February. So I was in a brace. First I was in a wheelchair, and then I was in a brace, and I told Nan, we were switching over from blocking the two Mackay lanes to two Malka, so we're flipping over that night, and DTS was gonna stop us, telling us, you can't do it, because they were so pissed at my contractor, and rightfully so. They had violations that they weren't adhering to. DTS told them about it, and they didn't fix it, so DTS draw the, line in the sand, so nope, we're not gonna let you switch over. Going back to the relationships, I had to call, and this is staff level, so thank God I have relationships with the staff level. I said, Ty, please, I'm begging you, I don't need a change order or delay from my contractor. I will personally go out tonight, crutches and all, and make sure every single violation you gave them, there was over 40 of them, is fixed tonight. You want to come out with me, you come out with me. And he's like, Lori, this is an embarrassment that you need to go out. I said, it doesn't matter. It's so important to me that I have your trust. So I'm out there at midnight with my crutches, like, yeah, make sure you guys better fix this, because my neck is on the line. If I give my word to that DTS employee that we're gonna fix it, we better fix it. And so, yeah, I forget the point of that story, but it was like,
I think the point was you had to talk to Ty. So
I was trying not to say his name.
I'd like to ask Ed, how many times you had to call Ty?
Many, many times.
So one of these common things I've come across in just about every single panel is the importance of trust, right? And like the importance of relationships. And, I can totally see why we're a small island and people expect to know you almost, right? And so having this kind of like local interaction and be able to know when things called, it's like, it's how to, I won't say work around the system, but work with the system, right? So Lance, can you just tell me, give me an example of like, what are the big things that drive up costs or keep you up at night? Is it somebody calling you and say, hey, we've changed our mind, we want to do something else? Is it a busted pipe that you just didn't do right? Is it somebody calling up and say, hey, we're in a junction, we got to wait for 2 years, or do that? What's the thing that like really, there's probably 1,000 things that affect your cost, but what are the top 3, or the top 1 or 2 that are going to drive up your cost?
Mostly if one of the directors call me asking for a favor. I hate that. I'm kidding. I really kind of like the point that Ed was making. Our systems, whether they're the state procurement system or whether they're the contracts themselves or whether they're the relationships that we create through these procurements, they're really designed to prevent bad things from happening. And the way that people operate them can be one where, okay, if that means that some good things also don't happen, well, that's just too bad. Because the risk of doing something bad is way worse than the risk of not doing something good. And this is a challenge I think that we all face. And the sort of the theme of this is how do we try to do infrastructure better? We all have to take some personal accountability, and it takes some risks along the way. I think government is not good at that because their systems of employment are not set up that way. The reason private sector does better there is because actually you get promoted if you do something good. And if you don't do something horrible, you probably stay employed for a little while longer until you do another good thing. So, you're allowed to take more risk and encouraged to take more risk. The other difficult part that government has, I think, is, there's no incentive for innovation. There's almost no interest in trying something new. But in the real world, like changes happen constantly, right? So if you think about the way that construction is done today versus the way that it was done even 5-10 years ago, the state has to like catch up with license laws and with procurement code to try to utilize what is a new technology, and everybody's afraid of making a mistake. And so we don't have the benefit of some new technology or the use of like some unique contractual model. Would you agree?
I totally agree. And I think just having this conversation, I think we had it at Dwayne's thing, that the
Is that when you were making fun of me? I
I
can't
did.
remember. Yeah.
I did. I
Okay.
did make fun of you. But during the Hawaii Executive Collaborative, we talked about, well, the first question to me was, how come the state doesn't have the best and the brightest people? And I didn't get offended that they asked me. I was fine with that. But really, I mean, if you look at the state in general, and you look at your interaction, or even the legislature's interaction with directors, it's very rarely positive, right? They're on the news when they screw something up, or they're in a hearing when they got to be questioned by the group. Very rarely do they get accolades that say, "Oh, you did something really good." So really, the whole conversation got to change. The reason that I take the rap for all of my staff is to make sure that they don't have to worry about that kind of criticism. When they move forward, if we mess something up, we go fix it. We just gonna keep going. And if somebody questions it, my call. That's it. Everything's good. And the reason I come out to these speeches, because I don't like to speak in front of people looking at me the whole time, but I do it because I want to make sure everybody understands what we're trying to get done, why we move the way we do, why we take the different risks where we do, why we contract differently than everybody else in the state, to ensure that you guys understand it. We do the same thing with the legislators, so they understand it. We speak to the media quite a bit to make sure that the public understands it from that perspective. So when they see that things are a little bit different, hoping they're understanding that the chance of something going wrong is much, much less than the problem of staying still. The big discussion that I have with my staff all the time, the two extremes that you can be considered in a state. You move forward and you screw something up and you're incompetent. Or you stay still and you don't hear the concerns from the public, you don't meet their needs, you don't mitigate their concerns, and you're considered apathetic. I'd much rather be considered incompetent. Easier for us to move and adjust rather than sitting still. I mean, very difficult to adjust from there. Very difficult to defend that position. So that's the change we're trying to make. We're trying to make sure that we're incentivizing movement. We keep telling our staff, I want designs done in 6 months, typically 2 years, right? 2 years minimum. 6 months, I want them done. Because if it's done in 6 months or done in 2 years, either case, the plans are probably 70% right. Because there's going to be opportunities in the field you're going to find. There's going to be unforeseen situations that you didn't take into account, no matter how long you take. So we might as well get them done fast and find out the mistakes early. At least we're getting something done. That's not something that's really comfortable for state people because they want more time to get it perfect, because they don't want to get criticized for something that could go wrong. But if it's my directive, they're moving forward in that direction with the whole understanding we could support them and we'll adjust as we go. It's a lot easier for everybody.
That's a great point. So, you know, in the private sector, we incentivize people usually with money or a promotion. How do you incentivize people to the upside to take more risk in public sector?
All impact. It's all impact. There's nothing we can sell to the public. I cannot pay you more money, but you should come over anyway, right? I mean, really, I got to be telling everybody that if you come to the state, just somebody out of college, you come to the state, you can do more in the first year than any of your friends going to private. Everybody else is going to be stovepiped into different areas because private, quite rightfully so, is going to train you to be an expert in the area before you can expand beyond. I can give you more opportunities for you to have impacts, not only for the state, but in your community if you want it. So it's impact that we got to drive by. And of course, we're allowing telework to make sure that they can work from wherever they are, from home, whatever it is. We're making sure that we incentivize them or empower them in different areas so they can make decisions, of course guided through most of it, but decisions on how we impact Hawaii.
That's good. It's nice to hear in a cynical world that people wanting to make an impact is actually makes a difference. It motivates a lot of people. It motivates a lot of people that are serving us that are probably never going to get any credit from anything. Okay, so I want to try a little game here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to just say an idea that is like known in transportation, and we're going to say underrated or overrated. And the idea is underrated or overrated is like if something, you take it to the average and you say, oh, I think that's an underrated idea, or that's an overrated idea. So let me just like model it first. So the Beatles. I think they're overrated, right?
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wait. You cannot use that as an example and then just move on. That's terrible.
Yeah. So and then
But you'd be wrong about it.
but and that's great. So right. So then I would have to. You might ask me, why do you think the Beatles are
No, I don't
overrated?
care what you think.
Yeah.
You're just wrong.
Okay. Well, I promise not to do that. So we'll just go around, and if you say something interesting, I might ask you to explain. If you don't want, feel comfortable with anything, you just pass.
That's good.
So, are you guys game?
Sure. I'm game. Ask me about Ed.
So I'll just do one that's easy at the beginning. Birthday cake. Underrated or overrated?
Underrated.
It's underrated.
It's overrated.
No, what?
I'm a pie guy.
Yeah,
Cake.
I'm with
Cake,
you,
cake,
Lad.
cake.
I'm a pie guy.
Okay, so now we've done this. Here's another thing. Self-driving autonomous vehicles.
Underrated.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
So how's that going to change? We're thinking about housing. We're thinking about things going 40 years in the future. You guys think about this all the time. I don't. How is that going to affect what we do here?
He's the.
So,
okay,
car
I'll
guy.
start. I'm definitely not an expert, but I was just at the American Public Transportation Association huge conference this week in Florida, and about 11,000 attendees. And one of the tours was to ride the autonomous vehicle. I was too chicken, so I didn't go. But I know it's coming. I just bought a new car, and that thing drives itself as long as your highways, the two white lines, long as there's two white lines it can follow, but it's coming. It's coming. I was a little scared. I don't want to be the guinea pig, but I think it's going to make a big difference for us.
So don't worry, you can ride it here.
Ooh, it's good.
We're already running it at UH. There's a shuttle at UH that we've started in Manoa. And we're also going to put one at UH West Oahu, because I don't need permits to run it on the UH road. That's one of the relationships we use to make sure we can push things forward faster. But once we start getting everything, all the bugs worked out, we'll start pushing towards the city streets to ensure that we connect Manoa and the teacher housing and the like with that autonomous shuttle to connect back up again. The same thing with UH West Oahu. At the airport, your Wiki shuttles will be autonomous very soon as well, just to make sure that we can normalize this process. Because I got to tell you guys, I mean, I don't know that you guys know, but again, we kill about 107 people on the highway every year. I mean, that's just in Hawaii. About 40,000 nationwide. I don't know if everybody understands that the most dangerous thing that you do every day is jump in your car. I don't know. I really don't know if everybody really understands that. The autonomy that's coming forward will help change the landscape on infrastructure safety immediately when it comes through. That being said, it takes us about 25 years for a fleet to change out. So there's no way that we can understand within the next 25, 30 years that we're going to have fully autonomous system immediately. So it's going to take some time. But that being said, we can run autonomy in different areas, and starting with transit. I mean, those are big areas that we can push autonomy forward to ensure that we get safety. Because I don't know about you guys, but I see bus drivers, they're not the safest drivers either. That's a big vehicle.
Wow.
But right? But I cannot criticize because we got a shortage of bus drivers. So please, anybody in the room who's a bus driver, apologize.
Wow.
No, but seriously, if we move forward on autonomy in those different areas, in transit areas, it gets us closer to normalizing that type of technology on the system, because it's going to help the legislature move forward as well. We got to remember, we got a body that creates the laws of our land, and there's someone that body that cannot envision a vehicle driving down the road without a driver in it. So we're going to make sure that we start normalizing in the way we can in different areas, because we know it's going to be transformative. Let alone, push away the safety stuff. There are people who on the system, they just cannot drive already, whether because of physical, not because they're bad drivers. Some of them shouldn't be driving. But there's some of the system that are, because of their age, they cannot be driving, because of physical impairments and the like. This gives them back their own transportation security in different areas. So the sooner we can get towards that full autonomy on the system, in some way, shape, or form, the better.
Wow, that's interesting. Do you think it's going to increase commuting times or decrease them? Because on one hand, you don't have to drive, you can just sit in your car. On the other hand, maybe we need less cars on the road. I don't know.
So my perspective, overall, when we have a fully autonomous system, I don't know that all of us will be owning vehicles in the future. If we have a fully autonomous system, then a vehicle can come pick us up, jump in a car, and just take your ride to wherever you need to go. I don't know that we'll have the same 1.3 million vehicles owned in the state of Hawaii. So I think from overall perspective, it may even things out. For all of you on the road, I gotta have 11-foot lanes minimum, because I just don't trust that all of you guys can stay within a 9-foot lane, right? But if all the vehicles are autonomous on the system and all of them are controlled to be accurate, to stay within the speed limits, there's a potential that I can increase capacity on the highway because all the vehicles will stay within their lane, which would make the commutes a lot smoother. So there's all kinds of opportunities for us to improve just given the technology.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Public-private partnerships.
Underrated.
Oh, well, there's going to be controversy. Underrated.
Okay, well. And maybe in whatever context it's used, because we had a very public failed P3 at heart. So it depends on where it's being used.
Yeah, my perspective, it's a tool like any other tool in your tool chest, right? You don't use a wrench to pound a nail into wood. You use a hammer. And so there are tools and there are uses, and in the right circumstance, it is an amazing tool. But it's not the tool to be used in every circumstance. And you shouldn't think that it's going to solve all your problems. I think too often, particularly in the square building, and like they find the latest sort of gimmick and it becomes the panacea to solve all of our problems. It's just not, because you don't use a wrench to pound a nail. There are circumstances for work, there's circumstances it doesn't work. It's really hard. It's hard work because there are some inherent differences in what the private sector seeks and what the public sector seeks, and public-private partnerships require you to bridge that gap. Now, interestingly, I think the way we do that is because people, real humans, got to sit around a table, look each other in the eye and say, this is what I need to make this work from a private sector perspective, because it's got to be financeable, it's got to make a certain margin, I've got to do certain things in order for it to work. And on the public side, they got to come honest and say, but I need this in return. I need this level of return. I also need a certain certainty around performance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if humans can get in the room and you can build a level of trust that goes beyond what's on a piece of paper, then you can make it work. And it can do amazing things.
Do you have anything to follow up on that?
Totally agree with that.
So, well, maybe you can tell, what's the context where, like, okay, great, it works sometimes, work doesn't, but what are the contexts in which it works well, and what are the contexts in which it does not work well?
I think when the government agency has resources that can be put into, can be risked or put into play for the private sector to partner with, and they can be more nimble on. I mean, as Lance is saying, PPPs are really labor intensive for everybody involved, because it's like a design build on steroids. Now you got to look at the whole life of the project or initiative or infrastructure to ensure that everything works out the right way. But it's not a matter of whether or not it would be better or worse than if the government just did it the right way. In some cases, it's whether or not it even gets built.
Yeah, you got to think about a public-private partnership. It's a trade. It's a relatively, at its core, it's a fairly simple trade. So the government's going to come with something, and I'm going to trade it for something else. What you cannot think about it like is the private sector will do everything, and government will sit back and do nothing, because that's not how deals are made, right? So there has to be a trade. Often the trade is, hey, I'm the state, I have land, so I'm going to contribute the land. You're the private sector, you have capital and you have know-how. You're going to build housing or whatever it is, right? But fundamentally, there's a trade, and people, and generally speaking, it's usually quite simple at its core, right? But you got to be able to articulate the trade. You have to be able to monetize it, and then do all the hard work of getting all the paper that makes it legal and makes it binding to work. But fundamentally, at its core, you got to think about P3 like a trade.
Yeah, it's also really difficult to figure out where the risk is. And I used to work on PPPs in my former life. And it was so often the government was totally outgunned. You need such high capacity government personnel that can read contracts and know and think like the private sector. It was that's how contracts work. Like, I'm not saying the private sector is bad, but it's really difficult for a government to have that level of expertise. And when I see that, is the only way they do is they create the spare statal so they can like basically go outside the government hiring practices. So it's interesting. Okay, here's another one. Environmental impact studies, underrated or overrated?
Oh, I pass.
Yeah,
I
me
pass.
too.
I pass.
I'm not answering that.
I would just say, because I cannot underrate or overrate that.
So that's a pass.
No, it's not. It's not.
No, properly rated.
There's some conversation.
Properly rated.
A lot of times you'll hear from government agencies that that's the barrier or that's the hurdle. It's not. It's the process. That's it. So if we just got to decide, do we prioritize our environment or not? That's it. And we do. We absolutely do. We who live here want to make sure Hawaii is Hawaii for as long as it can be. So we never see environmental impact statements or the EAs or anything as the barrier. That's the process. We plan for that process. The barrier are stupid policies and procedures that we have in place that we can change. So we make sure that we make our processes as efficient as possible so we have time for the process.
So in your experience, how could we improve the process with the environmental impact statement or studies, right? Like we want to we want to study things, but they're also long, and sometimes you have to have like 4 or 5 in a project. So what are some examples of like how we can improve that process?
Yeah, well, and I would just say, there's examples of us shortcutting the processes in the past to clearly show we shouldn't do that. I mean, clearly. The end results of shortcutting the processes are never good. But one of the big things that I would love to see is that we honor the process. Once somebody gets through the environmental process, we should be good to go. I mean, that's not what I see right now. In some cases, we have 7 or 8 different bites at the apple from other agencies or other groups to stop something they don't like. Now, one of the biggest things that I have a concern about from that perspective is we're allowing a small segment of our community to speak for everybody else. And that's not right. They went through the process. The majority of the state spoke. They should be good to move. Just because some group doesn't see that same priority or doesn't like it, they shouldn't be able to stop it.
That's great. Thank you. So there's this new study out where it's by, I won't state this, the authors, we can talk about it later. But what they said is that they were looking at the inputs that really drive up transportation projects the most. And what they found was the most important input that drives up the cost of transportation procurement is the capacity of the DOT procuring the project. Do you guys, so they found that was 20% across all departments of transportations in the United States. Do you guys feel that's true?
I don't know, I cannot speak for the other DOTs. What I see in driving up costs significantly is how busy the industry is. I mean, rightfully so, if a contractor is busy with a lot of work, they're not gonna give you the same type of price that you would as if the industry wasn't that busy. They gotta now price in the opportunity costs of actually getting that work. I mean, that's just from my perspective. Bigger piece of that right now is the supply chain. It's still broken since the COVID times. So those costs are raising the prices of transportation tremendously right now. When we look at the IIJA that gave us a 25-30% increase in federal funds that came through, I'm spending that money immediately on increases in costs already. And through no fault of it's not like the construction industry is greedy or anything. It just is the cost of doing business right now.
Yeah, I would, one of the things that's different about Hawaii, right? I can't go buy ready-mix concrete from the next state over because they got better pricing. I mean, I only have what I have, and our resources are pretty limited. it was just reflecting on this the other day about cost, because we've seen all these costs in steel and in clinker and every component part of all of the materials that we use every day. And, how I was sort of bashing COVID about it, because COVID kind of broke the system. But I don't think that's true. I think COVID just exposed something that was already there, that the supply chain was so fragile that it didn't take much for it to sever. And then so when it broke and started coming back together, like many companies figured out, look, I can make way more money if I produce less stuff.
Exactly.
And they're not stupid people, so they just said, okay, I'm going to produce less stuff and make more money, and that has not corrected, and I don't think it will correct as long as they're still making plenty of money. So we have to think differently about how we use the limited resources we have. So Ed's got to think, I can't do all of my asphalt paving at one time because there's only a couple plants and there's only so much asphalt oil and aggregate. And so either I'm going to do a runway or a highway, but I can't do both at the same time. And he's the biggest buyer of asphalt there is. So people like that have to think differently and prioritize their project, those who can, right? So the private sector who wants to put a driveway in your house, I'm sorry, you're gonna wait because Ed has to do a runway. and go be expensive. But when you're the buyer that Ed is, he has to really think about that differently.
And Lori, what do you think about like the factor of having of capacity within your administration?
No, it's absolutely true. When I was at that conference, all the transit projects across the nation are doubling in price because of the infrastructure bill. The contractors, it's so fat right now. They can pick and choose which projects they want to bid on. And what the industry is seeing, and this is just transit, I'm sure it's across every industry, either they get one, maybe two bidders, and it's so high, it blows away their independent cost estimates. So what are you going to do? You can't not award, but then you don't have the funds either to award the contract. So it's a problem. I mean, that's across the nation. Make it even worse for here in Hawaii. We have one of our biggest procurements that's out on the street right now. These contracts, there's no specialty here. There's no specialty contractor here to do our work. They have to come from the mainland. So it is a problem. On top of the supply chain issue, it's having the qualified contractors to do the work and bid on it.
Interesting in that study, the second biggest driver of cost was lack of competition, or not enough bidders, which is kind of goes to all of your points, right? And that makes Hawaii very unique in the fact that we don't have the scale you can't have 15, 30 major construction in the raw industry inputs here.
Yeah, yes and no, because it's scalable, right?
Okay.
So even the other state DOTs are having the same issue. Even though they have contractors, or a lot more contractors in their area, and contractors can cross borders a lot easier, they're still having those issues with increasing costs. That 30% I talked about, across the board in the nation.
And it's not just materials. I mean, we have organized labor and people here. Like the halls are not. They're not like there's a lot of guys in there waiting to go to work.
That's the thing.
From a labor perspective, you can just look around. Like our industry is getting older, right? So that means that we don't have enough people filling from the backside, the younger guys coming up in our business, and that's true for guys who swing hammers or run cranes or do engineering. I mean, we just don't have enough people coming into our industry, and so we have to solve for that in some way through workforce development or training or technology. I mean, we have to, because I don't see that correcting either. It's not like that's going to get better by itself.
Okay, so we're gonna go to questions in a bit next. But what I'd love to just hear from you is like, for us people, mortals outside the industry that don't work in infrastructure, and you guys, I mean, what I'm hearing is you guys have to know the future exactly as it is, write contracts, be able to have like a Rolodex that sounds like 500 people long, and know and be able to take initiative when you can. So other than those things, what's one thing you wish that people not working in industry, whether non-engineers, non-people that are in this industry of infrastructure provision, which you wish they knew?
Um, s- I'm older than Ed, so I guess I can go first. I really believe all the years that I've been doing this, I've been doing this a long time with a lot of people. I think by and large, all the folks working, whether it's contractors or government, the individuals working in those businesses are doing their absolute best to try to get the work done well, to try to get the work done on time, to try to get the work done with the best quality they can produce. I think in most cases, the intention is almost without exception good, like positive, and they're trying to do the best they can. Um, I think leadership's job is to try to remove as many obstacles as possible, because I think by and large, the people working in it are trying to do the best they can. That's everybody from the guys, in the trenches to the people in the corner offices. I think, we who try to produce these projects that, primarily cause you inconvenience when you're driving more than anything else, get demonized a lot. But I think people generally are trying to do good.
So the governor was asked at lunch today, social media detriment, or is it positive? It could be positive, but that's not what's happening today. And so I guess I would like people to know that we as leaders, we're people too. We have feelings, our family and our friends have feelings, and social media is very brutal to people like us. And it's not nice. To Lance's point, we are trying to do the best that we can. A lot of us, we've inherited things that we're just trying to make better. We're trying to do the right thing, but to personally attack us, it's not helpful. Just criticizing the way we dress or what we do, I mean, that's not helpful. If you have constructive criticism, that's helpful. And I've actually gotten some of them. People reach out on LinkedIn or Facebook to say, hey, what about this? Or, my deputy and I, we're on the Rick Hamada show every Friday. People actually call in and say, they have some really good ideas. Dillingham is a nightmare. I get it. We're impacting the public, we're impacting the businesses, but one business in particular, he'll call me, he'll text me, and he'll say, what about this? How about you guys do different color cones feeding into the business driveway so that people can easily see, here's how do you get to this business? I'm like, that's a great idea. I couldn't do the cones because there's standards, but we went ahead and made signs to direct them. So constructive criticism is great, but personal attacks is not helpful.
I think for me, I just want to appreciate this group for all the partnerships that we've had in the past and all the things we got to be able to do. For us, at DOT, we really do everything. We want to build houses. We cannot. But we can partner with developers who are building houses, make sure that we build the infrastructure in exchange for the houses in different areas. We'd love to control land use. We cannot. But we can increase access into different communities to ensure that we can incentivize businesses to move into areas, to build commercial spots, to make sure that goods, services, and opportunities are a lot more accessible for different people. Working with in Kalailoa to ensure that we get more businesses there. We get that, the Leeward Coast hour-and-a-half commute into town starts going away, starts going down to that 30, 45 minutes. That makes things more livable. We would love to control energy, cannot. But we can incentivize electrification on our side, make sure that we can push other state agencies to electrify. We put out a contract that allowed, I gotta tell you guys this. In state, there are two barriers to any kind of initiative. First, funding, always. Second, contracting, always. Because we just talked about how great our contracting processes are. We put out a contract that allows us to purchase the service, and we worked with Scott Glenn at the energy office at the time, to ensure we put out a contract that allows us to purchase the service of any kind of electrification throughout the system. We knew it was going to be transformative because it'll allow us to move forward a lot faster because I don't have to put the money up front. So we had all the state agencies and all the counties sign on as well. Now, they didn't know what the hell they were signing on to in the beginning. They really didn't. It was a new type of contracting mechanism, but they signed on anyway because of the potential. Now this allows everybody, instead of paying, okay, so we got 43 Teslas. Now, don't judge me. They're Teslas, but they're really good. They're safe, they're efficient, we had a good deal on it. We got 43 Teslas. Those Teslas would have been 70 grand each if we purchased them. I don't have $2.8 million to spend on vehicles, but we only pay $7,000 a year for 10 years. So at the end of the 10-year contract, I pay the same amount I would have paid up front. So I save on the financing immediately. Plus, I don't maintain it. So that $180,000 that I would have paid to maintain those vehicles, all off the table too. So it's a big savings for us because we entered into a contract with this green fund company that allows us to purchase the service of the vehicles. Now, all state agencies and counties are jumping on board too. We're just ordered about 150 Ford Lightnings that are coming through very soon because mid-sized vehicles are really important to like DLNR and DHHL to get through their properties. They're coming in very soon. The only delay is the manufacturing availability. Once they come in, we start pushing electrification even more. Secondarily, when we start changing out our vehicles, it's not going to last 10 years. After 5 years and our vendor starts changing out the vehicle, those vehicles get sold locally secondhand. So we start penetrating the market even further. While we put in these, or bring in these electric vehicles, we start putting in more charging stations throughout, so we can further proliferate electrification. We don't control energy, but we can support it in that way. We'd love to be able to convert to hydrogen. I mean, the biggest thing that we can do in Hawaii is get energy security. We cannot be secure waiting for fuel to come in every year, every 2 weeks to ensure that we can run our system. But we already can produce hydrogen. And if we can get more of our system on hydrogen, whether they're vehicles or whether it's HECO's power plants, we get more and more secure. We cannot do that, but we can incentivize it. So for us, we just appreciate the partnerships that we have with all of you, and we hope that you guys bring in the ideas that we can start moving forward on. Because we only hear from you when you're pissed off, okay? How many of you guys are happy about the speed humps that popped up in front of your houses? How many of you were upset? I don't care. No, seriously, but that's the only time we hear feedback, is when something is negative. We'd love to hear it up front. We'd love to hear it to make sure that we can see how we can work with you to make some things better.
Great. So we're going to take the first question from Zoom, and this is from Kate Crowell from UH Manoa. You and this is a question for Ed, but I think it's relevant to everybody. You mentioned that the interactions between the legislators and directors can be negative, and a focus on today's talks has been fostering trust and more interaction. What do you think is necessary for better communication and collaboration across departments in the legislature, especially with regards to measuring project progress and developing policies to make our goals actionable?
Good question. And let me be clear. I wasn't criticizing legislators for questioning the directors now. And that's just a product of what's important to the public. To me, that communication to ensure that we're being as productive as possible, gotta be early, gotta be often, and gotta be consistent. If the legislators don't understand what we're trying to get done, very difficult for them to support when we do things good or bad. It's easier for them to be on the same page with us if we let them know first in our processes what we're trying to do. Let them know when we start running into those challenges in different areas, and let them know what we're trying to do to work out of it. If we don't keep them in the loop, the only thing they can do is bring us in front of them and ask us very difficult questions in those hearings. And this is the same thing for the public. If we're not out often with the public to inform what we're trying to get done, it's not unreasonable for the public to be upset about something that we don't do.
Do either of you guys want to add on to that?
No, it's it to Ed.
Okay. We probably have time for one question from the audience. Does anybody have anything? Yep, please go ahead.
This is for Ed. Ed, you being from Portland, I know Portland Light Rail is often offered up as kind of a model. However, all these light rail projects that are offered as models are the model of bringing people from their homes into a city center. do you think there's potential for another model of thinking, how do we keep people in their neighborhoods, working in their neighborhoods, so we don't need to put cars on the road? It helps with decarbonization, decongestion. If people are kind of living and working in their neighborhoods, do you see a movement towards that type of thinking?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is kind of what we talked about with adjustments to land use, making sure we get away from the bedroom communities and ensuring that we start mixing that live, work, play model. For rail, let me just ask, how many in this room voted for rail? Laurie, close your eyes. Right? So a pretty good amount of us. How many in this room voted for rail because you were going to ride it? So much less, right? So all of us voted for rail so the person next to us in the next vehicle would ride it, right? But I mean, seriously, that was the concept. So really, but really, frankly, we voted for it to ensure that this is a solution so that the traffic we have today won't get worse, so that we could densify the urban core where our housing should be and densify those commercial areas to ensure that everybody had access to their goods, services, and opportunities without having to jump into a car. So I absolutely believe that that's the future that we're pushing for. We just got to make sure we can help it out with access into different areas to ensure it happens.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors, the Goodfellas Bros, the Hawaiian Dredging Construction Agency, and the Wilhelm Group. We really appreciate. Not only do we really appreciate our sponsors, but we really appreciate your sincerity and your honesty and like teaching us. You guys got to see in the future, fortune tellers and leaders, and do all these things. So we really appreciate your time here, and we really thank you for your leadership.